Can you hear me? All right.
I can hear you.
Okay, amazing. Let's get this meeting started. It's 1 minute past 1 p.m. UTC. Today we are discussing the future of Ethereum Classic. I'm Afri, I'm your host. I'm moderating this call. I try to abstain from any opinionated, how do you say, from voicing any opinion on any of the proposals, because this call is expected to be more controversial than the previous calls we used to have. So we start with a quick clients team check in. Let me see who's here. Parity Ethereum, that's probably myself. Do we have anyone from ShaneSafe or ETC Labs representing Gas Classic? Yes, we have ETC Labs core developers on the call. Same is true for Multi-Gas, and I don't see anyone from ShaneSafe or Pegasus, but that's probably not a problem. First of all, I want to emphasize that this call is supposed to be a technical call, so all decisions made here should always be made on a technical foundation. In case I am a bit slow, I take some notes here as I speak, so please bear with me. And yes, thanks everyone for joining. We are 16 people on the call right now, so let's get this started. First of all, I expect from everyone on this call to be basically familiar with the ECIPs 1043, 47, 49, 70, and 76, which will be discussed in more depth in this call. Whereas the 1076 is mining algorithm change process I just proposed last week. This is the one I want to discuss first. The other ones are mainly the limitation of the DAG size, which is 1043, the change of proof of work algorithm to SHA-3 or Ketchak 256, which is 1049, the potential change of the mining algorithm to programmatic proof of work is 1070, and last but not least, the reduction of the default block gas limit to 1047. I strongly believe that we would need to discuss a process here. Because there are a lot of different stakeholders in this community that are affected by a potential change of the mining algorithm and all the ECIPs I just read out. My proposal was to define a process in ECIP 1076, which involves core developers making the technical decision, miners making the intermediate decision on which proposal to prefer, and in the end, the ECIP editors to making the final decision on how to move on. Does anyone have any comments on the process outlined in 1076? Is this something we could consider? Is this something we should reject straight away? Does anyone have an opinion?
Yeah, I think that I really like the idea of using a testnet first and making sure that it works perfectly on a testnet, and then having sort of a cutover onto the main net after that. And maybe if we could establish a period of time, or what are the signals that we're looking for in that testnet to know that the switchover would be successful.
Are you suggesting to have an additional step in this process, which is the testnet stage? Or are you just suggesting a completely different process?
So I was curious exactly what that testnet to mainnet would look like, and how we sort of like do that switchover, because you had mentioned at one point where we're mining a testnet with a block ID or with the network ID, and then we switch over to it to a different one. So I was curious if that was related.
I mentioned that.
Possibly. I'm just looking through right now.
I think it was Cody. Kevin talked about it.
Is Cody on this call?
No, I'll ping him.
Okay, this clearly needs a testnet, of course. There's no way to activate this on mainnet without properly testing this. I believe the ECIP 1076 should be more explicit about that. I'm happy to augment this, but the main focus of this ECIP is outlining the process beyond the technical testing and development cycle.
Yeah, I personally wasn't familiar with 1076 before this call, so I'm looking through it right now.
Okay, then I, before everyone looks at it right now, I give a high-level overview. So the motivation is to have a process in place that everyone can stick to, and because of the potentially controversial nature of a mining algorithm change, having agreed upon a process to activate or to not activate certain changes to the mining algorithm, I clearly see the benefit of once having agreed on a process that we all would also agree on the potential outcomes. And this is the motivation for ECIP 1076. I quickly used this proposal to also outline the available options, the potential outcomes of this, which are 4 different types. The one is just status quo. We stay with SH and we stay with the increasing DAG size and nothing changes. Option B is to limit the DAG size as specified in ECIP 1043. Option C is moving to SHA-3 or Catch 256 instead of SH, and the option D is programmatic proof of work as proposed by Jas. And the process that is explicitly specified in ECIP 1076 is having 3 stages. If we add the testnet stage, that would be 4 stages, but this has to be discussed. First stage is the technical stage. This is what I'm proposing, what we are in there right now, to have regular calls on the discussed option and to move to make the technical decision. Does it make sense on a technical level? Is the proposal sound? And if yes, move it to last call stage, regardless if we as community want to have this or not, but move it to last call. So just to make sure that this proposal is sound. And the outcome of what I call the tech stage is that one or even multiple competing proposals could be in last call stage, and then the network can move into the miner stage, where solo miners, mining farms, and mining pools can signal support in favor of one of the proposed options by just doing extra data by just prepending extra data with 5 certain bytes they set to a certain value that can be evaluated over a range of blocks. And in this stage, the network can evaluate what would be preferred by the miners. And I propose that if there's a certain threshold met, that we kind of lock in this signal, this miner signal, and then the EIP editors go into the decision stage. This is the third stage, where we consider the one selected by the developers and the miners in the previous step that shall be moved to accepted, and all the others shall be rejected. And this also proposes a way how to determine the actual fork block number. Yeah, that's a high-level overview. There's also a longer section, the specification and node configurations, how this would work. Yeah, this is what I believe is, in my eyes, the most efficient process to make a decision on this. It tries to involve as many stakeholders as possible, and I also believe that it is fair to give miners a voice in this with this topic. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss this first before we go into the other ECIP. Any comments?
Okay, if I may. So in this, can you move because okay, now it's cool. So right now, so with this proposal, I would say that only miners have a decision. No, it's not like all the stakeholders have a decision, and I really don't like this because of the centralization of mining, and it's like, I guess, two biggest pool can combine voices, and this will be 70% or close to 70%. And because of that, I really don't like this automatic threshold for decision.
I tend
Any
to
other comments?
agree with that. Only because if it was like a soft fork thing, and then that would be like I think it would be a really good idea to make sure that we had, like a large majority of miners. But since it's a hard fork, it's really like any miners who want to defect on that can. So essentially, I think all that would serve to do is kind of just light a fire under the debate even more, rather than solving anything. But the rest of the proposal, I think, sounded pretty good.
Okay, any further comments? Anyone else?
One question, is this process been used previously, and how's it gone? Any pitfalls we should be aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
For soft forks on Bitcoin, it has been done, I believe. I think that's how they activated SegWit. Right? Yeah, that's kind of how they do it. So they try to get, because they're all soft forks, so really they just need the 51%. But they'll have everyone signal a much larger amount, like it needs to hit 70 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I forgot about this. This is mechanics Bitcoin soft forks used to do. But I'm not aware that Ethereum or Ethereum Classic has. Yeah.
So they don't force things on network participants, right?
But that's completely a minor decision, right? How does it work?
Well, Yeah, since Bitcoin only does their forks as soft forks, I think it makes more sense for them to do that because once they hit that threshold of, let's say, 70%, then the miners can safely turn on the feature and there will not be any possibility of like a fork since it's a soft fork. As long as you have greater than 51% of the miners, there is no split that can occur.
I've come across a lot of proposals that would for like any hard fork that we can do. There's been a proposal that I've seen that allows us to have a similar sort of network upgrade where you reach a certain threshold, it will like update the network for you, kind of like a ratchet mechanism, if you will. I don't know if like I can explore those if that can complement.
I don't know how.
That could potentially work a little bit better because, yeah, just to again emphasize the problem is that since this is a hard fork, even if we do get the 70% of the miners or whatever, the other 30% can just say, well, I don't care, and they're going to end up with their fork. So not quite as good of a mechanism.
Yeah, I'm
I
just
just want to
thinking
clarify.
about the attacks that could happen when all this shit's happening, the transition and all that.
I just want to clarify that this is not an automated process as it is in Bitcoin. So determining the actual winning proposal is still manually done by ECIP editors, and also determining the block number is kind of specified in the process, but it's still in the end made by the core developers.
Yeah, and one other thing that I noticed as well with the proposal is that right now, Ethereum Classic is 1/20th the size of Ethereum. So it's not inconceivable to me that you could have, let's say, a few large Ethereum mining pools move over to Ethereum Classic, mine on there to activate the proposal, and then switch back, and basically turning the tides on it.
Yes, 51% attack during just to vote on the proposals.
Yeah,
The only
however,
other see with the current proposal is there's been zero analysis done on the nodes themselves. Nobody has put any statistics forward on what happens, like how does this affect the actual client performance. So that's something to look into.
Yeah, where
So,
actually in the block would this data be located?
in the block header, you mean? In Exadata?
Where in the block header? Is this like a specific field or something that would be created, or is there currently a field for it?
The extra data field. But I was talking about the actual algorithm, but yes.
So my idea to mitigate or to reduce the risk of a 51% attack is to just increase the number of blocks, so the range, so you don't have like 1,000 blocks where someone could just mine 700 blocks to meet this threshold, but to just increase it to like 100,000 blocks, so it will be really expensive, for instance, for an Ethereum pool to mine Ethereum Classic for months or for 2 months to just vote on a proposal. And we can arbitrarily change or increase this number if possible, if required, if necessary.
Isn't that where we're at right now, though?
Yeah, actually, I would say that this is a very nice way to gather information from miners that actually do care, or pools that actually do care about it and have some opinion about this. So this is nice for getting some statistics for consideration. But as I said before, I don't like personally the automated solution with threshold.
Okay, and he was saying there wouldn't be one.
threshold.
But wouldn't it mean postponing this decision forever? I mean, how do we want to make this decision? Do we want to make this decision here? Can we make this decision here?
I think that the most important part is the node teams, the people writing the actual software, come out and say, this is what we believe. This is going to be the default option on our software on this particular date. And if enough teams do that, then the exchanges, the infrastructure, the wallet providers, the mining pools, et cetera, can choose to either adopt that software or not. But I think ultimately the responsibility to make these changes comes down to the people that are writing the code for the network and the people that are running the code for the network, and that the miners are simply service providers that are choosing to run that code. I don't think that they should be taking such an active governance role, because there's a variety of cases in which the miner's interest might be directly opposed to the network's interest. You know, talking about, let's say, block rewards, talking about, let's say, there was a very, very efficient ASIC that you could create for ETH hash right now.
You can't trust shit on mining, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if core developers would care enough about the mining algorithm, then we wouldn't be ending up with competing proposals. And also, isn't the reason Ethereum forked off because of client defaults?
What time?
I think it is important for us, at least as developers and all the separate development teams, to at least be able to agree on one path forward. So that's my opinion. But like, I agree with Alex that, like, you know, it's not necessarily shouldn't be up to the miners. And I think in this case, it's more of like a security situation that should be up to, like, you know, technical people.
Yeah, and you know, I can hypothesize a situation. Imagine we can say that there's a 10% likelihood that the mining algorithm is going to be compromised in the next few years. And the current miners have invested a lot of capital into the system. So they're not necessarily going to want to implement that change, even though that might be the long-term best decision for the network. And I think that really the strength of a proof of work network is the fact that there is that division of interests. You have service providers and you have developers, and you know, they can swap each other out pretty much.
Okay.
So
yes,
I'd just like to voice my opinion that I think I'm with you, Afri. I like the idea of miner voting, and I think it's especially strong given a long or very long trial period. You said 100,000 blocks, and I would be keen to write on the whiteboard a number closer to maybe 5 million blocks at least. But you know, that's just a variable that we can play with and talk about. But the reason that I like miner voting in this capacity is that yes, it is uncomfortable that we're 1/20th the size of ETC, and it's also uncomfortable that our mining is controlled by a handful at best of mining interests. But I don't see the miners as second-rate citizens or just as service providers in this space. I see them as, in a big way, a kind of lifeblood for the space. So I think it's really important that those interests who are providing this critical value to the chain, that they have a voice that reflects their investment, which is exactly what voting in this way does. This is not to say that I don't think that it's a good thing to work together as core developers, to work together with miners to build a solution that works for everybody, because we're all on the same team, of course. Anyways, I think it's important to give them a voice. That's my opinion.
Okay, thanks. We are already 25 minutes into the call, so I want to gauge interest in ECIP. I feel it's controversial, but I also feel that we have 3 options moving forward. One, what I believe is very unlikely, is having the option of accepting this mining algorithm change process. The second option is rejecting it and just giving this decision to the core developers, client developers.
A point of clarification. I'm sorry to interrupt, but with this voting process, I am unclear if when we're talking about this, we're talking about a voting process that would be programmatically enforced, or if we're talking about maybe what we could call like a soft polling process, where we're using this extra data to glean miner opinion that would be specifically gauged to hash rate influence, but not necessarily expecting to build the client software in the way that would be programmatically dependent on those votes.
No,
do you have one way or another in mind?
Yes, this shouldn't be enforced. However, I want to, in case we agree in some kind of process, we stick to it. So if we agree, for instance, now that miners have a voice and they can signal interest over like a range of 5 million blocks, threshold of 70% met, then that we also respect that and on this process, that we acknowledge this and move on using this result, not screwing them over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Afri, I kind of agree with your process, just from the fact that it is only like a signaling kind of process, so you can get all that kind of data. I'm also down if it's like maybe we can add more signaling options to it later on, just to add to that data, and if it's not something enforced for now.
I think it's important to note exactly like what the timeline is that we're considering, or like that the developers are considering, or like even like, you know, gonna do. Like, it's not gonna happen tomorrow. I think it has, there's a lot more discussion that needs to take place. But yeah, it's not gonna happen around the corner.
Exactly, and if we talk about 5 million blocks, for instance, this would be 2 years.
So I think we should delay it.
Delay what?
Any decision.
Why?
Well, on the mining algorithm change.
But delaying it is effectively making a decision. I'm not getting your point. There are like 4 competing proposals out there, and we need to find a way which allows us to move on with one or multiple of them, but not doing anything does not solve any issues right now.
No, I think there needs to be more research on it being deployed on ETC.
Let me ask this. Would we be able, does it seem in this room like we'd be able to reach rough consensus on at least, like, if we got one of these proposals to have specific numbers like 75% or whatever of like miners need to vote on it for a certain amount of time, and if that is the case, then we would all agree to move to that algorithm? Would a
It would have to
DCP
be
with all those numbers reach rough
I'm
consensus
personally,
today?
I don't, like, honestly, I don't quite like the proposal, again, because we're attempting to take something which is sort of this very complicated rough consensus and enshrine it in this very specific way. that can be sort of moved or manipulated by mining pools who honestly have very, very opinionated directions about how the network should go. I mean, we've seen this in Bitcoin, we've seen it in Ethereum. Like, miners have an opinion on how the network, and sometimes that can be very different than what either users or developers might want. So I think that the issue with this is that we're combining the two together, and we're basically giving miners are never going to do what's bad for them in the short term. That's sort of the issue that I have with the proposal. I don't think they're going to optimize for the long term.
It seems to me like really the problematic element of this for most of us is going to be like line 39, where we talk about decision stage, and you reach a 70% approval threshold, and then it shall be considered accepted. Aside from that, I think this is an excellent way to gather signal from active participants in the mining community. But beyond that, there's no reason to make it the trigger to activate a change. Instead, just view it as more of a way to get a really active or a really accurate signal from the participants, so that we know where their preferences lie.
I'm down with that if the developers are down with that.
Okay. So
I just think there needs to be more discussion, and like how doctors get a second, or doctors tell you to get a second opinion. I think you need to get a second opinion.
I mean, this process is necessarily going to give us a pretty good period of time for discussion and review and all that.
Yeah, also we are just on a call discussing this, so the next step would be discussing the proposal itself. So I don't fully understand.
I think there's an expectation, though, that like something will happen today. Regardless of like what we think, there's going to be like this expectation that like something's going to happen, like around the corner, mining algorithms going to change, and like bad stuff's going to happen. I think we need to like address like expectations and like managing that shit.
Just from my personal view, I feel that miners are monetary driven, and leaving them to decide fully long-term changes is probably not the best idea, but I do like the idea of collecting that data and using that as part of the decision-making process.
Okay, as we are running short on time, we are half an hour in this call, I would propose the following. To modify the ECBP to have this miner signaling voluntarily. So we get this data point from miners, but we don't commit to use this as a trigger for a decision. Is this how I understand the sentiment?
That's what I would like to see personally.
What's the difference between an ECBP and an ECIP?
Jesus, let's not derail this.
I'm just confused.
It's basically it's just a process.
The same thing.
It's like an ERC in Ethereum.
Okay.
Agnostic.
So I'm just going to ask about the specific amount of blocks. Then I think, like, not to get super specific, but I think 5 million is way too many. Only because in the next 2 years, like, we could just get crushed. So like, I would think that like 6 months would be the longest period of time for like an active voting amount of time that would be useful.
Okay, that's roughly 1 million blocks. What do you think about 1 million?
Does that number actually have to be solid, or can it be something that we can vary based on the type of decision being pulled?
Yeah, I think it should be dynamic.
Let's take this offline. This is like an offline discussion, in my opinion, because we'll just banter for the next half
Okay,
hour.
okay, yeah, but like, can we, so we can like banter over the numbers offline, but does that mean we could try to make a decision on at least going forward with Afri's version then? Should we like kind of try to get rough consensus on that now? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the idea is to figure out offline a reasonable time span. We just had the idea of 1 million blocks and change this proposal to not enforce a decision, but to allow miners to voluntarily commit to some of the options. Is that correct? Do we have rough consent?
I'm down with that, but can't that be really easily gamed?
Let's take it offline, please. If you have actual facts around how you think it can be gamed, maybe let's make an issue about it. Because we have 6 months probably to have a better understanding of this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what like the developers have to say about like a mining algorithm change.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. We are going to discuss this once we are done with it. So nobody is saying over my dead body, so I assume that we have rough consensus here on having at least
What exactly?
the signaling. The signaling I just explained that we remove the binding trigger from the ECBP and just allow the specification for miners to signal.
Agreed.
I'm cool with all those conditions, but like I asked earlier, what is the difference between an ECBP and an ECIP? I'm looking at the repo right now.
Yeah, go ahead. Meanwhile, I will move down the agenda with the actual ECIPs. I would propose that we are going backwards, starting with programmatic POW. Just do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think we had a debate before about Proc POW, like internetwork, we sort of have a history with Proc POW from the summit where we uninvited one of the authors of the Proc POW. And because there might have been some IP risk, and even if there isn't, just like a lot of red flags around it that might, harm a network from an IP sort of claim. And that, stemmed the Apache license debate that we also had. And from that, it seemed clear that we needed to officially propose Proc POW so we can officially either reject it or accept it. But the idea at the time is like nobody accepted it. So it's probably just going to be rejected. So I proposed the ECIP 1070, which is Proc POW. The entire draft is written by the authors if def else, and I just referenced it under the Apache license as a proposal for us to officially debate it. And it's kind of like a good call to go over Proc POW first, because I think we mostly have rough consensus about it being rejected, but it's good to go through it.
Yeah, but you got to remain impartial. You got to be like, good with everybody talking, because it's just a permissionless network.
For sure. I'm happy to hear what everyone thinks about it.
I'd like to put up my 2 cents in regards to all this in general. I mean, I would say it's no more rejected, in my opinion, than any other algorithm change, simply because the ones being proposed have had no formal
Totally
testing.
agree here.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so
Yes.
there's been like no formal testing on any of them. The best test we have is ProgPow, which is going to be widely tested against the Ethereum network. So, in my opinion, until I've seen thorough analysis of any of them, which I'm happy to do, I'm happy to actually test the nodes to see how performance goes against all of them and see actually like what actually changes under the hood. Until I see that, I'm opposed to making any drastic change, because I think any change this quick is just
crazy,
jumping the gun on preemptive for no reason.
Yeah, so
just for information, there is a Astor testnet, which is a Keccak testnet implemented with Parity client. So there is some testing about this. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
I
we should
can't
get more
see
people on
anyone.
that.
So, Greg, I'm not fully understanding your point. You're saying we should not jump to conclusions. We should not make decisions because we don't have enough data. But isn't that like a chicken and egg problem? Because nobody would really care building these clients and gathering this data unless we make a decision here.
What exactly are we, or not?
Sorry.
What exactly are we deciding?
Programmatic
Okay, well,
proof of work.
someone in. Okay, sorry. My point was that somebody said, I think Yaz said that like we're against ProgPound. I'm saying no, I'm not, because there's clearly ETH is about to launch it, so we can see what's going to happen.
But I mean, this is independent from what Ethereum Classic does. So couldn't we just say, I don't know, just for instance, programmatic POW is slower than ETH and more complex, so we don't necessarily want it anyways?
Who does
I
that
mean,
affect?
I'm curious to just see what happens. We'll like actually do some analysis on it, since we all use all the upstream clients anyway. Looking at ETH is a great way to actually generate those stats.
I agree there. What exactly would we have to look for? Like other clients?
But if we don't want it, I just rephrasing it, if we don't want programmatic proof of work, so why would we care about Ethereum or upstream clients anyways?
Oh, I mean,
So
SHA-3.
one thing that's really troubling about programmatic proof of work, and that was not included anywhere in the ERC or the ECIP, and that really I had to figure out sort of by watching videos and diving into it, is that it's designed to be continually modified. So the creators of it have said that it is not actually going to be ASIC resistant forever, and that the way that it's designed, it needs to be continually tweaked in order to be able to maintain the property of ASIC resistance. And I think that that's just an enormous security hole, just right off the bat. The fact that the hashing algorithm needs to be continuously changed. And I think that if that is indeed what it is, and it wasn't included anywhere in the original proposal, this is just what they're saying. And it's called programmatic proof of power. It's designed to be reprogrammed. I just think that right off the bat, I mean, anybody can tell that that's not like a very sort of sustainable system, or it's going to cause a lot of governance disputes in the future.
Sure, but I mean, do you think Kekak or Shaw is going to have that issue either? Like, it's not like these are innovative, brand new hashing algorithms. They've been around.
Well, the difference is that for example, Kekak, you don't have to modify it.
I know, but this is my big issue. Is it like,
Yeah.
are you trying to avoid ASICs, or are you not trying to avoid ASICs? Because if you're trying to avoid ASICs, Ethash or ProgPower, obviously those two options that like do the best job at that, whereas Kekak and SHA are very popular hashing algorithms that have a higher probability, in my opinion, of having an ASIC formed. So
I do believe that ASIC resistance is out of scope for this call, and also out of scope for the mining algorithm change, because I don't hear many people voicing.
So personally, I'm looking just at the quality of the hashing algorithm itself. I'm looking at whether or not this hashing algorithm can secure the value of the network and whether it can be compromised. So the issue with something like Prog POW is that if you have this thing that you have to continuously change, well, it's when are we going to ever change those knobs? What are the reasons? What are the safety implications? I think it just opens up so many questions that it's just going to cause major problems in the future. And then second of all, I actually really disagree with that idea that it is more ASIC resistant, because I've had numerous people actually come to me and say that they can easily build ASICs for Prog POW, and that they're actually ready to do so once it appears clear that the community has reached consensus.
About Proc POW, if you look at Bob Rau's audit, he said that it can get the job done, but there's a way to create an ASIC for it. But if you move, there's a mechanism where you move the memory closer. It's written in its PDF. I'll share it here. But it shows that Proc POW, you can build an ASIC for it easily.
Okay, so
I would say that.
I'm going to agree with Alex that the fact that you have to continually tweak things it makes it. I think ProgPoW is pretty cool for some things, but it's not going to be good for blockchains because basically the conversation that we're having right now, the tough decision that we're making right now, every time we need to tweak something, it's going to be that same thing again, where it's like, who does this favor? Like, who's profiting from this? Like, should we do this? How are we going to do this safely? So it's going to be a million questions. And I think we need something that's able to stand the test of time once we switch it, and it's not going to have human intervention constantly.
So let me ask this question. We are 45 minutes into this call. Does anyone actually consider ProgPoW, or do we all agree that we want to reject it anyway?
I'm not a developer and I'm not a economic node operator, so I can't really speak on their behalf.
Then please don't.
All right.
So if nobody really wants programmatic proof of W, then the entire point of this proposal is, as I understand, is rejecting. Does anyone disagree with rejecting that?
I don't.
Unless somebody really wants to make a case here. Yeah.
Sorry,
So
someone said my name.
Yes,
I called your name because for me it was who showed any interest in ProgPoW. I mean, positive interest. So the question was, who is against rejecting this right now? So I thought that probably you were the one who's not against. Who's against rejecting this right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against ProgPoW just as much as I'm not against any other change in the hashing algorithm. Especially if we're going to make a decision, many months from now, I think it's fair to actually just see, what happens from the ETH side of things. That's just my opinion. So no, I'm not. I think it's a little. In my opinion, I think it's fair to keep all the cards on the table and just see how they all go. Because I'm also partial. I also don't think that we need to change fhash. I think it's fine. It's fine for now.
So you disagree with rejecting ProgPoW?
Yes, I disagree. Yes.
Is anyone else disagreeing with rejecting? So how rough consensus works?
The same way we're deciding right now on ProgPoW, is that the same way we're going to decide on SHA-3? What are we deciding exactly? More research, more discussion, an algorithm change next week or what?
So Kevin, just to be clear, I don't think we're gonna be finalizing a process for SHA-3 K-Track to 56. We're just gonna be talking about it. But for ProgPoW, I think it's just for us to move on from the debate on ProgPoW, because it was clear as a signal throughout months in the community that nobody likes it. We just want it to go through the ECIP process and come up with a decision on it, just to get it, just for people to move on from it,
The other reason why I think it might be valuable to reject it is that there are a lot of Ethereum developers who are extremely opposed to ProgPoW, like a lot of dApp developers and users. And I think that if there's no one in the community that really wants to champion this, then we can send a very valuable signal to these developers to say, hey, look, we are a chain that rejects ProgPoW. We're rational. We're approaching this debate from like a really strong perspective, and we kind of reject this sort of capture technique, which I think that the Prog POW community has employed. So if unless someone wants to champion it, I think we should absolutely send that signal to the ETH community that we're against Prog POW.
Also, one final point on technical, you know, if you want to look at the technical part of ProgPow, you have to consider licensing, right? And currently there's a lot of anonymous developers, and you know how Bob kept talking about, you know, the DCO and not being anonymous. Now, I think anonymity is important, but in the case of ProgPow, there's just a lot of, I mean, even if it's might not turn out to be true, there's a lot of red flags and stuff, and licensing issues would be one of them, because it would mean that anyone who's running an ETC client and has a dApp that connected to the ETC client might be, you know, subject to these IP claims, you know, and that could really harm our community and our network, to have an algorithm that might be hidden behind a lot of IP trolling.
So, Greg, would you be the only? Would you be the one who champions programmatic POW for Ethereum Classic?
I think there's probably one important thing that we probably need to discuss is before rejecting PogPol. I mean, I think the main argument we had was that because no one is championing it, and we probably had the so-called rough consensus that no one wants it, so we can reject it. But what I want to point out is we haven't really agreed on a process. So, for example, if we want to do any kind of signaling, we would need an open process that try to include an open process which allows new proposal to be made, and try to include them if possible. So I mean, this is just to make sure we are not like put some community members behind, and if they are not really into this the current meeting, if for example, if they want to prefer some other mining algorithms, not necessarily PogPol, I think we should probably discuss the process first before we actually change the status of an ECIP to rejected status.
Yeah, I agree. So,
I agree also.
What would be the consequences right now? Shall we let this lay there in draft stage, or?
I think so.
This is a compromise. We move it to a rejected state, and we put very clearly that if somebody wants to champion this proposal and really wants to make a case and address the concerns of the community, we can move it out of the rejected state, or we can create a new ECIP that they can champion, and we can kind of go from there. But I actually am pretty against Prog POW, so I think it would be great if we could move it to rejected.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Do we have?
But like, how can we make that decision and then not make the same exact decision for SHA-3 and like check?
What's the point of this question? Can we please stick to the process? We have 55 minutes into the call, and we have a lot of on our
Let's do it.
It's okay. So do we have rough consensus that we send Prog POW into rejected state, but we will not commit? So whenever someone champions this, it can be revived into draft stage in future?
Yeah, that sounds like a great compromise.
Totally down.
Yeah, I support that.
Okay, thanks. So I would like to move on to SHA-3. We have only a couple of minutes left.
Can't we extend it?
Yeah, we can.
Maybe like
let's
15
try
to 20 minutes?
Yeah, let's discuss for 10 minutes if we can candid for 15 minutes. Who wants to introduce
Yeah, let's
us
lay
to
out
SHA-3?
exactly how we're going to divide the time up, like discussion and whatever.
So I'll happily introduce it because my name's Alex Sankov, just in case anybody on the call doesn't know. I'm the author of this proposal. I wrote it about a year ago, right in the aftermath of the 51% attack. And it was really a very spur of the moment sort of proposal brought on by Donald McIntyre's point, which is that we have no idea how much hostile hash power there is right now for Ethereum Classic. So one of the options from a security perspective at the time was to come up with a potential proof of work algorithm change. Now, the reason why I decided to choose Ketchak 256 was because that's what I personally have a lot of experience with when I was creating dApps for ETC. So everything in ETC, from the block headers to the hash tables to the Solidity contracts, everything uses Ketchak 256. And my thought process at the time was that if we need to implement a proof of work change, why don't we go with what we're using everywhere else in the system? Because it'll inherit those strong security properties and it'll have more compatibility. Now, that was kind of how it started. And the more I started doing research into the Ketchak 256 algorithm, the more impressed I basically became, because for two reasons. So first of all, it is without a doubt the safest hashing algorithm on the market today. So it went through 5 years of trials. There are hundreds of papers written about it. It's very well respected in the cryptography community. And I think that if we're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar cryptocurrency economy, we need to have the strongest cryptography possible. And then the second reason was simply the performance. So right now, the Ethereum Classic network has about 8 terahashes, I believe, or I don't know the exact number. One SHA-256 S17 miner can do 56 terahashes. So basically, one mining rig has more hash power than the entirety of the Ethereum network, Ethereum Classic network. And I think that unless there's a really good reason for why we're using such a low performance algorithm, then I think that we should move on from it. And then the second thing is that it's hindering the actual development of things like the Fly client, and it's causing problems because it requires this pseudo random cache that we have to maintain. We have to maintain about 50 megabytes of state in order to be able to calculate the hash. And we need to maintain over 4 gigabytes of state in order to mine and produce a hash. So I don't think there's a very good reason for that, because I don't think that even the ASIC resistant argument even makes very much sense. I don't agree with it. So as the champion of the proposal, my logic is that we move on from it and move to SHA-3.
I just want to share some not exactly counter, but some reservations. So those are not exactly things I think we can't adopt SHA-3, but we probably need some work done. I wrote some thoughts on this. I will post the link again. So I think the thing is, first, hashing algorithm has slightly different requirements compared with mining algorithm. I don't think we really need to use that point to decide which mining algorithm we choose, because it just has slightly different safety requirements. The thing I think, because you mentioned the mine point, one of the mine issue we try to tackle with the SHA-3 is 51% attack. So I think that's actually an issue with deliberation, what I call deliberation. So that it basically says whether the miner actually knows that he's mining something or not, whether he knows that he's actually spending actual resources. So in that case, if, for example, if we are in the case that mining network is controlled by botnets or controlled by unaware mining activities, then those mining hash algorithms are basically hostile, and they are more likely to get 51% attack. And if not, then we will probably be fine unless we go into some crazy blockchain war, like if Ethereum and Ethereum Classic don't like each other yet. But back to the point for deliberation, I think one important thing to note for SHA-3 is that because it's a general purpose hashing algorithm, so it's quite performant on a normal CPU and GPU anyway. And this is also the case for things like SHA-255. So how they, like for Bitcoin, like how they solve the deliberation problem is basically to make the algorithm extremely ASIC friendly, which means the ASIC hardware is like 4 million times more performant compared with a normal like CPU or GPU. The issue I think I had with this one is we don't have the actual ASIC right now for SHA-3 that is 4 million times more performance. I think initially we may get something like 1,000 times or 2,000 times more performant than CPU or GPU. But in that case, if we only had ASIC like that, then it will be vulnerable to this deliberation problem. And I think in that case, it will actually be more vulnerable to 51% attack. So I think this is something we need to tackle. We need to make sure, if we really adopt SHA-3, we need to make sure we really put enough investment into the hardware community to make sure they actually build some ASIC first before we adopt the algorithm.
I think that that's a great point because we want to make sure that we have the ASICs on the network if we were to switch to it, so it doesn't get attacked by rogue miners. But actually, there are currently Keccak 256 ASICs that are in existence, and you can see them. I think someone posted it. It's created by Fusion Silicon. I've talked with people in a variety. I was chatting with Henry Kwan from Epic Blockchain, and he basically looks at it and he says the Ethereum Classic Network creates $100,000 worth of new Ether every day. And that is the subsidy to the miners to do innovation and to actually create these specialized tools in these data centers. So if we say that we're creating $100,000 a day bounty on new SHA-3 ASICs, I think that there absolutely will be some. And I think that if we send a very clear message early that we're adopting this on this and this a date, and this is our reasoning, then I think that they will be there in time by that date if we give them enough lead time.
Yeah, like what I'm saying is we need to solve this issue first. Like we make sure we had a ASIC first before we really decide whether the Ethereum Classic community wants to change the algorithm or not. I mean, because otherwise, we just don't have enough information right now to make the decision.
I completely agree with Sorpas because without existing ASICs, we don't know the availability, the efficiency. We have too many variables, so we don't actually know how secure our network will be because we can just guess that, for example, mining with ASIC will be 10 times more efficient than with CPU, or maybe not, and we need to know that it's actually available to the miner so they can buy it, and or there are actually bought and deployed in the in the mining rigs. So yeah, I completely agree that it would be great to have at least one miner or few miners to know about the performance of the miner and availability and
for example, centralization of the production and distribution of these devices and so on.
I'm down with that, but that's a really, really long process.
I'll just say that we're not going to get ASICs until we actually accept the proposal to change the hashing algorithm. Like no one's going to spend like $10 million making ASICs unless it's actually the hashing algorithm. So I would just suggest a variation of that is that if we do accept this, we just accept it on a long enough time span and put some money in it, to development toward that. And also, I would say that I want to say that I'm pretty sure there was some research done originally when SHA-3 came out in the viability of making ASICs for it, and some like designs that have already been funded and that are already out there to help get this started.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, so I've been talking a lot with people in the mining community and the electrical engineering and the chip making community, and everybody that I've talked to has said that SHA-3 is actually the easiest algorithm out there today to build ASICs for. It's not complicated at all, and because that doesn't have a specific bitwise function, it doesn't have an add gate in it, which is in SHA-256. It'll actually cause a lot more of an even production process. A lot more. There'll be less chance for big companies to sort of centralize the process because it'll be easier to make the ASICs for. And it provides sort of a linear benefit. So the issue with SHA-256 and why it's sort of so centralized with companies like Bitmain and InnoSilicon and those type of guys is because you can put in a lot of R&D into figuring out how to optimize SHA-256 and make it ASIC boost, all this sort of stuff. But because of the way that SHA-3 is designed, it's actually very sort of fair. So if you do it on a 28 nanometer board, you're going to get this performance, and it's really not that hard, or it's a lot more equitable for the participants. So they really like it.
Hi, I have a quick add, if that's right. My name's Mike, and I have OX Ethereum token based on SHA. I wrote GPU mine for.
You're cutting in and out.
Oh,
You're breaking up a little bit. Can you use push to talk or get closer to the mic?
sure. Sorry. Let me just use. Sorry. I'll just say quickly that the NVIDIA performance of SHA-3 is really good, and recently there's FPGA performance that's only a small multiple, about 2 to 4 times more energy efficient. So I think coming out of this call, it would be great, Alex, if you could compile estimates of ASIC performance so that we could sort of get an understanding for overall what is that ASIC boost and ASIC lift over both FPGAs, which are common in the market, and also.
You're breaking up again.
That was all I was say. Sorry if it wasn't.
Okay, thank you for your.
Thanks for the input, Mike. By the way,
Awesome.
so I just posted in the room, which is sort of a comparison of ASICs and FPGAs in experiments we did.
So, to my mind, the technical benefits are not nearly clear enough to make such a dramatic change. Until I think that becomes clearer, we have more data, we have to reject this.
What are the technical benefits that aren't clear? Is it the safety or is it the performance?
Both.
I think
and
it
why
should
now?
be clear what we're deciding on, or we're discussing on deciding on.
So the central claim is that SHA-3 is the safest algorithm in terms of hashing security that is out there today.
That may be,
As yeah,
that may be, but changing it creates huge vulnerabilities, and we're not quite sure how it's gonna impact the network. Sure, it's more efficient, but you're talking about an ideal, which is fine on paper. And beyond that, I don't think that's nearly enough to justify changing the algorithm.
so maybe you can provide a little bit more clarity. Like, what do you say is the ideal here? I'm just
Well,
simply
the
saying
onus
that
is
we
on
were
you.
51%
This
attacked.
is
Yeah, so I'm saying that we were 51% attacked.
And Kekek has nothing to do with that. That won't solve that problem.
I think we should discuss this a lot more instead of making a decision on where to move. The difficulty bomb was delayed a few times, and there was no uproar about that. So let's,
Yeah, I think getting more data and research just by probable cause to say, oh, we're gonna just accept an algorithm change like today or anytime soon. I think not saying you accept it or reject it, but do more research and data is something I would be worried about. Is yeah, we were 51% attacked, but if SHA-3 is efficient for GPUs as well, how do we know that the hardware on Ethereum or wherever that hardware came from isn't just gonna jump onto the Kekek, or if we switched an algorithm, I would assume they could still put their hardware, or even if hardware is cheaper and more efficient, you just have cheaper hash rate that could be rented as well. So
they could
that's
create
why,
their own network.
huh?
They could do a BSV.
Yeah, that's what I would be worried about. So like that's why like a consortium of miners, not just ASICs, but also GPU miners. Like you want to make sure that you're not going to be vulnerable to that amount of hash rate that came onto the 51% attack. Because if we're going to be resetting our mining ecosystem, I would assume we're more vulnerable. And whoever those 51% attackers were, I would think they're still just as capable.
I think also you should consider the security assumptions of Nakamoto consensus. Basically, it assumed that your network has the majority hash rate for its hashing algorithm. And the reality is we're 1/20th of Ethereum, right? And if you take a look at the history of ETC, we were pro immutability and we rejected the DAO fork because we believe in that. You can't just bail out people and stuff. But what we inherited was a network that was mostly abandoned by the foundation as they moved on with their fork. And we inherited a lot of the bad design decision within in ETC. You have no monetary policy per se. We had the difficulty bomb, and if you're going to be a proof of work kind of network, you don't want a difficulty bomb. And the other thing is Ethash. Ethash was designed only to sustain Ethereum until they moved to proof of stake, right? But we inherently designed it. So from a security assumption, we're not fully a proof of work network, following that security model, because we're always going to be in the shadow of Ethereum. Now, if we were the majority chain using Ethash, then yeah, there's no reason to change it. But if you're gambling on Ethereum moving to ETH 2.0 in a few months, it's not going to happen right now. So
yeah, and with the current data and research we have, I think we'd be gambling to assume that our network would be secure if we switch the algorithm or accept this proposal based on the current data and research. Because I still think you say, oh, you're 51% attack is a feature of our network. And obviously early days of other networks or minority chains, obviously they have their vulnerabilities. Even Bitcoin Cash is technically 51% attackable. The thing is, if we switched our algorithm, that hash rate, that 51% attacked ETH hash and Ethereum Classic, what exactly is preventing that same malicious actor with that amount of hardware from, jumping onto the Keck 256 chain with their GPUs, for example.
Reasoning why would be that SHA-3 is extremely efficient in ASIC implementations. This is just the way that it is, because it's such a well-designed algorithm and it's a pure algorithm. It's very easy to create sort of dedicated miners. So if Ethereum Classic adopts SHA-3, will be by far the largest algorithm on that hash. So the people that are going to be mining it are going to be investing considerably in terms of buying hardware, setting up data centers specifically for that purpose. And those are the last people that would want to 51% attack the network because they've just invested so much in it.
But that's so small, though. Those people, those miners, they're in relation to everything else. The 300 terahash on Ethereum, that's so small.
So
I don't think we can assume that ASICs are here to secure Keck 256.
So I kind of agree with Seb on like signaling. Like you need to do more analysis. I agree with you on that, Seb.
So we are 80 minutes into this call, and I believe we have to wrap up here. I think there is consensus on SHA-3 that we don't have consensus. From the ongoing very constructive discussion, I would say that everyone agrees we need more data, we need more research on Keck. And also,
Offrey, what's your opinion on Keck? I'm sorry, moving to Keck.
Yeah. I don't know. Why would that matter?
I had actually loved to hear your opinion personally, because you're the lead developer of Parity. Like, I've worked on Parity. I'm just curious what you think, because you've been in this space for a while. You've programmed these things. I mean, I know you're leading the meeting, but I mean, I think you're absolutely allowed to have an opinion as well. And I don't think anyone will say, "Oh, you're biased in one direction."
Okay. So thank you for asking. My personal opinion, and I want to distinguish this from my moderating position, is that I believe Ethereum Classic has a lot of potential moving towards Keck-based mining algorithm. Both because Keck is an amazing algorithm. It's future-proof and very efficient, and also having this ability to move away from horrible ETH that I personally believe is not very efficient, and we will have a lot of technical benefits, but I would still want to wrap up this meeting now and say we don't have any consensus in it, and I would partially agree that it would be nice to have more data and research on that matter, because this would make it a lot more easier to discuss this in future, and I would propose to do another meeting on mining algorithm change, specifically discussing the SHA-3 proposal, but also discussing the two proposals we didn't touch today, which are namely the limited DAC size proposal and the what's the other one? The block gas limit. So shall we schedule another call maybe in 1 month, or maybe, well, in one month is maybe next year, and meanwhile allow miners to start signaling for according to the ECBP I proposed earlier?
I think with the things we didn't address today, I think we should at least give them a few days, or like we should prioritize those as well. Prioritize discussion as well.
Okay, so thank you everyone.
Okay,
I'll
so
be hanging
does that
around
mean...
if anyone wants to
Sorry.
still chat.
Okay, sorry guys. I was just wondering, so does that mean we're going to go forward with that first proposal that is just not defining which algorithm, but it's just saying that we're going to let the miners have a voting period? Do we have like a consensus on that for moving forward?
Yes, so I will post meeting notes right now.
I'm good with that.
I have them ready, and one we discussed earlier, in case you tuned in later, that we kind of let the miners signal interest or signal their favorite proposal moving forward, but we will not use this as binding vote or something like this.
That can be gamed really easily as well. So I agree with you. I don't think it should be binding.
So I will close this meeting officially. If you want to hang out, feel free to do so. I will close the meeting now and thank everyone for joining.
Thanks,
and
Opry.
Post notes.
Thank you, Opry.
GitHub.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.